KaraokeBooks.
Chapter 4. They were all in good health. It could not be called ill health if Ivan Ilyich sometimes said that he had a queer taste in his mouth and felt some discomfort in his left side. But this discomfort increased and, though not exactly painful, grew into a sense of pressure in his side accompanied by ill humor. And his irritability became worse and began to mar the agreeable, easy, and correct life that had established itself in the Golovin family. Quarrels between husband and wife became more and more frequent, and soon the ease and amenity disappeared and even the decorum was barely maintained. Scenes again became frequent, and very few of those islets remained on which husband and wife could meet without an explosion. Prasovya Fedorovna now had good reason to say that her husband's temper was trying. With characteristic exaggeration she said he had always had a dreadful temper, and that it had needed all her good nature to put up with it for 20 years. It was true that now the quarrels were started by him. His bursts of temper always came just before dinner, often just as he began to eat his soup. Sometimes he noticed that a plate or dish was chipped, or the food was not right, or his son put his elbow on the table, or his daughter's hair was not done as he liked it, and for all this he blamed Prasovya Fedorovna. At first she retorted and said disagreeable things to him, but once or twice he fell into such a rage at the beginning of dinner that she realized it was due to some physical derangement brought on by taking food, and so she restrained herself and did not answer, but only hurried to get the dinner over. She regarded this self-restraint as highly praiseworthy. Having come to the conclusion that her husband had a dreadful temper and made her life miserable, she began to feel sorry for herself, and the more she pitied herself the more she hated her husband. She began to wish he would die. Yet she did not want him to die because then his salary would cease. And this irritated her against him still more. She considered herself dreadfully unhappy just because not even his death could save her, and though she concealed her exasperation, that hidden exasperation of hers increased his irritation also. After one scene in which Ivan Ilyich had been particularly unfair and after which he had said in explanation that he certainly was irritable but that it was due to his not being well, she said that if was ill it should be attended to, and insisted on his going to see a celebrated doctor. He went. Everything took place as he had expected and as it always does. There was the usual waiting and the important air assumed by the doctor, with which he was so familiar, resembling that which he himself assumed in court, and the sounding and listening, and the questions which called for answers that were foregone conclusions and were evidently unnecessary, and the look of importance which implied that, if only you put yourself in our hands we will arrange everything. We know indubitably how it has to be done, always in the same way for everybody alike. It was all just as it was in the law courts. The doctor put in just the same air towards him as he himself put on towards an accused person. The doctor said that so and so indicated that there was so and so inside the patient, but if the investigation of so and so did not confirm this, then he must assume that and that. If he assumed that and that, then, and so on. To Ivan Ilyich only one question was important. Was his case serious or not? But the doctor ignored that inappropriate question. From his point of view it was not the one under consideration. The real question was to decide between a floating kidney, chronic catarrh, or appendicitis. It was not a question of Ivan Ilyich's life or death, but one between a floating kidney and appendicitis. And that the doctor solved brilliantly, as it seemed to Ivan Ilyich, in favor of the appendix, with the reservation that should an examination of the urine give fresh indications the matter would be reconsidered. All this was just what Ivan Ilyich had himself brilliantly accomplished 1,000 times in dealing with men on trial. The doctor summed up just as brilliantly, looking over his spectacles triumphantly and even gaily at the accused. From the doctor's summing up Ivan Ilyich concluded that things were bad, but that for the doctor, and perhaps for everybody else, it was a matter of indifference, though for him it was bad. And this conclusion struck him painfully, arousing in him a great feeling of pity for himself and a bitterness towards the doctor's indifference to a matter of such importance. He said nothing of this, but rose, placed the doctor's fee on the table, and remarked with a sigh, "We sick people probably often put inappropriate questions. But tell me, in general, is this complaint dangerous, or not?" The doctor looked at him sternly over his spectacles with one eye, as if to say, "Prisoner, if you will not keep to the questions put to you, I shall be obliged to have you removed from the court. I have already told you what I consider necessary and proper. The analysis may show something more." And the doctor bowed. Ivan Ilyich went out slowly, seated himself disconsolately in his sledge, and drove home. All the way home he was going over what the doctor had said, trying to translate those complicated, obscure, scientific phrases into plain language and find in them an answer to the question, "Is my condition bad? Is it very bad? Or is there as yet nothing much wrong?" And it seemed to him that the meaning of what the doctor had said was that it was very bad. Everything in the streets seemed depressing. The cabmen, the houses, the passers-by, and the shops, were dismal. His ache, this dull gnawing ache that never ceased for a moment, seemed to have acquired a new and more serious significance from the doctor's dubious remarks. Ivan Ilyich now watched it with a new and oppressive feeling. He reached home and began to tell his wife about it. She listened, but in the middle of his account his daughter came in with her hat on, ready to go out with her mother. She sat down reluctantly to listen to this tedious story, but could not stand it long, and her mother too did not hear him to the end. "Well, I am very glad," she said. "Mind now to take your medicine regularly. Give me the prescription and I'll send Gerasim to the chemist's." And she went to get ready to go out. While she was in the room Ivan Ilyich had hardly taken time to breathe, but he sighed deeply when she left it. "Well," he thought, "perhaps it isn't so bad after all." He began taking his medicine and following the doctor's directions, which had been altered after the examination of the urine. But then it happened that there was a contradiction between the indications drawn from the examination of the urine and the symptoms that showed themselves. It turned out that what was happening differed from what the doctor had told him, and that he had either forgotten or blundered, or hidden something from him. He could not, however, be blamed for that, and Ivan Ilyich still obeyed his orders implicitly and at first derived some comfort from doing so. From the time of his visit to the doctor, Ivan Ilyich's chief occupation was the exact fulfillment of the doctor's instructions regarding hygiene and the taking of medicine, and the observation of his pain and his excretions. His chief interest came to be people's ailments and people's health. When sickness, deaths, or recoveries were mentioned in his presence, especially when the illness resembled his own, he listened with agitation which he tried to hide, asked questions, and applied what he heard to his own case. The pain did not grow less, but Ivan Ilyich made efforts to force himself to think that he was better. And he could do this so long as nothing agitated him. But as soon as he had any unpleasantness with his wife, any lack of success in his official work, or held bad cards at bridge, he was at once acutely sensible of his disease. He had formerly borne such mischances, hoping soon to adjust what was wrong, to master it and attain success, or make a grand slam. But now every mischance upset him and plunged him into despair. He would say to himself, "There now, just as I was beginning to get better and the medicine had begun to take effect, comes this accursed misfortune, or unpleasantness." And he was furious with the mishap, or with the people who were causing the unpleasantness and killing him, for he felt that this fury was killing him but he could not restrain it. One would have thought that it should have been clear to him that this exasperation with circumstances and people aggravated his illness, and that he ought therefore to ignore unpleasant occurrences. But he drew the very opposite conclusion. He said that he needed peace, and he watched for everything that might disturb it and became irritable at the slightest infringement of it. His condition was rendered worse by the fact that he read medical books and consulted doctors. The progress of his disease was so gradual that he could deceive himself when comparing one day with another. The difference was so slight. But when he consulted the doctors, it seemed to him that he was getting worse, and even very rapidly. Yet despite this he was continually consulting them. That month he went to see another celebrity, who told him almost the same as the first had done but put his questions rather differently, and the interview with this celebrity only increased Ivan Ilyich's doubts and fears. A friend of his, a very good doctor, diagnosed his illness again quite differently from the others, and though he predicted recovery, his questions and suppositions bewildered Ivan Ilyich still more and increased his doubts. A homeopathist diagnosed the disease in yet another way, and prescribed medicine which Ivan Ilyich took secretly for a week. But after a week, not feeling any improvement and having lost confidence both in the former doctor's treatment and in this one's, he became still more despondent. One day a lady acquaintance mentioned a cure effected by a wonder-working icon. Ivan Ilyich caught himself listening attentively and beginning to believe that it had occurred. This incident alarmed him. "Has my mind really weakened to such an extent?" he asked himself. "Nonsense. It's all rubbish. I mustn't give way to nervous fears, but having chosen a doctor must keep strictly to his treatment. That is what I will do. Now it's all settled. I won't think about it, but will follow the treatment seriously till summer, and then we shall see. From now there must be no more of this wavering." This was easy to say but impossible to carry out. The pain in his side oppressed him and seemed to grow worse and more incessant, while the taste in his mouth grew stranger and stranger. It seemed to him that his breath had a disgusting smell, and he was conscious of a loss of appetite and strength. There was no deceiving himself. Something terrible, new, and more important than anything before in his life, was taking place within him of which he alone was aware. Those about him did not understand or would not understand it, but thought everything in the world was going on as usual. That tormented Ivan Ilyich more than anything. He saw that his household, especially his wife and daughter who were in a perfect whirl of visiting, did not understand anything of it and were annoyed that he was so depressed and so exacting, as if he were to blame for it. Though they tried to disguise it, he saw that he was an obstacle in their path, and that his wife had adopted a definite line in regard to his illness and kept to it regardless of anything he said or did. Her attitude was this. "You know," she would say to her friends, "Ivan Ilyich can't do as other people do, and keep to the treatment prescribed for him. One day he'll take his drops and keep strictly to his diet and go to bed in good time. But the next day, unless I watch him, he'll suddenly forget his medicine, eat sturgeon, which is forbidden, and sit up playing cards till 1 o'clock in the morning." "Oh, come, when was that?" Ivan Ilyich would ask in vexation. "Only once at Peter Ivanovitch's. And yesterday with Shebek." "Well, even if I hadn't stayed up, this pain would have kept me awake. Be that as it may, you'll never get well like that, but will always make us wretched." Prasovya Fedorovna's attitude to Ivan Ilyich's illness, as she expressed it both to others and to him, was that it was his own fault and was another of the annoyances he caused her. Ivan Ilyich felt that this opinion escaped her involuntarily, but that did not make it easier for him. At the law courts too, Ivan Ilyich noticed, or thought he noticed, a strange attitude towards himself. It sometimes seemed to him that people were watching him inquisitively as a man whose place might soon be vacant. Then again, his friends would suddenly begin to chaff him in a friendly way about his low spirits, as if the awful, horrible, and unheard of thing that was going on within him, incessantly gnawing at him and irresistibly drawing him away, was a very agreeable subject for jests. Schwartz in particular irritated him by his jocularity, vivacity, and savoir-faire, which reminded him of what he himself had been 10 years ago. Friends came to make up a set and they sat down to cards. They dealt, bending the new cards to soften them, and he sorted the diamonds in his hand and found he had 7. His partner said, "No trumps," and supported him with 2 diamonds. What more could be wished for? It ought to be jolly and lively. They would make a grand slam. But suddenly Ivan Ilyich was conscious of that gnawing pain, that taste in his mouth, and it seemed ridiculous that in such circumstances he should be pleased to make a grand slam. He looked at his partner Mikhail Mikhailovich, who rapped the table with his strong hand and instead of snatching up the tricks pushed the cards courteously and indulgently towards Ivan Ilyich that he might have the pleasure of gathering them up without the trouble of stretching out his hand for them. "Does he think I am too weak to stretch out my arm?" thought Ivan Ilyich, and forgetting what he was doing he over-trumped his partner, missing the grand slam by 3 tricks. And what was most awful of all was that he saw how upset Mikhail Mikhailovich was about it but did not himself care. And it was dreadful to realize why he did not care. They all saw that he was suffering, and said, "We can stop if you are tired. Take a rest. Lie down?" No, he was not at all tired, and he finished the rubber. All were gloomy and silent. Ivan Ilyich felt that he had diffused this gloom over them and could not dispel it. They had supper and went away, and Ivan Ilyich was left alone with the consciousness that his life was poisoned and was poisoning the lives of others, and that this poison did not weaken but penetrated more and more deeply into his whole being. With this consciousness, and with physical pain besides the terror, he must go to bed, often to lie awake the greater part of the night. Next morning he had to get up again, dress, go to the law courts, speak, and write. Or if he did not go out, spend at home those 24 hours a day, each of which was a torture. And he had to live thus all alone on the brink of an abyss, with no one who understood or pitied him.
KaraokeBooks.
Chapter 5. So 1 month passed and then another. Just before the new year his brother-in-law came to town and stayed at their house. Ivan Ilyich was at the law courts and Prasovya Fedorovna had gone shopping. When Ivan Ilyich came home and entered his study he found his brother-in-law there, a healthy, florid man, unpacking his portmanteau himself. He raised his head on hearing Ivan Ilyich's footsteps and looked up at him for a moment without a word. That stare told Ivan Ilyich everything. His brother-in-law opened his mouth to utter an exclamation of surprise but checked himself, and that action confirmed it all. "I have changed, eh?" "Yes, there is a change." And after that, try as he would to get his brother-in-law to return to the subject of his looks, the latter would say nothing about it. Prasovya Fedorovna came home and her brother went out to her. Ivan Ilyich locked the door and began to examine himself in the glass, first full face, then in profile. He took up a portrait of himself taken with his wife, and compared it with what he saw in the glass. The change in him was immense. Then he bared his arms to the elbow, looked at them, drew the sleeves down again, sat down on an ottoman, and grew blacker than night. "No, no, this won't do," he said to himself, and jumped up, went to the table, took up some law papers and began to read them, but could not continue. He unlocked the door and went into the reception room. The door leading to the drawing room was shut. He approached it on tiptoe and listened. "No, you are exaggerating," Prasovya Fedorovna was saying. "Exaggerating? Don't you see it? Why, he's a dead man. Look at his eyes, there's no life in them. But what is it that is wrong with him? No one knows. Nikolaevich said something, but I don't know what. And Leshetitsky said quite the contrary." Ivan Ilyich walked away, went to his own room, lay down, and began musing. The kidney, a floating kidney. He recalled all the doctors had told him of how it detached itself and swayed about, and by an effort of imagination he tried to catch that kidney and arrest it and support it. So little was needed for this, it seemed to him. No, I'll go to see Peter Ivanovich again. He rang, ordered the carriage, and got ready to go. Where are you going, Jean? Asked his wife with a specially sad and exceptionally kind look. This exceptionally kind look irritated him. He looked morosely at her. I must go to see Peter Ivanovich. He went to see Peter Ivanovich, and together they went to see his friend, the doctor. He was in, and Ivan Ilyich had a long talk with him. Reviewing the anatomical and physiological details of what in the doctor's opinion was going on inside him, he understood it all. There was something, a small thing, in the vermiform appendix. It might all come right. Only stimulate the energy of one organ and check the activity of another, then absorption would take place and everything would come right. He got home rather late for dinner, ate his dinner, and conversed cheerfully, but could not for a long time bring himself to go back to work in his room. At last, however, he went to his study and did what was necessary, but the consciousness that he had put something aside, an important, intimate matter which he would revert to when his work was done, never left him. When he had finished his work he remembered that this intimate matter was the thought of his vermiform appendix. But he did not give himself up to it, and went to the drawing-room for tea. There were callers there, including the examining magistrate who was a desirable match for his daughter, and they were conversing, playing the piano, and singing. Ivan Ilyich, as Prasovya Fedorovna remarked, spent that evening more cheerfully than usual, but he never for a moment forgot that he had postponed the important matter of the appendix. At 11 o'clock he said good night and went to his bedroom. Since his illness he had slept alone in a small room next to his study. He undressed and took up a novel by Zola, but instead of reading it he fell into thought, and in his imagination that desired improvement in the vermiform appendix occurred. There were the absorption and evacuation and the re-establishment of normal activity. Yes, that's it, he said to himself. One need only assist nature, that's all. He remembered his medicine, rose, took it, and lay down on his back watching for the beneficent action of the medicine and for it to lessen the pain. I need only take it regularly and avoid all injurious influences. I am already feeling better, much better. He began touching his side. It was not painful to the touch. There, I really don't feel it. It's much better already. He put out the light and turned on his side. The appendix is getting better, absorption is occurring. Suddenly he felt the old, familiar, dull, gnawing pain, stubborn and serious. There was the same familiar loathsome taste in his mouth. His heart sank and he felt dazed. My God! My God! He muttered. Again, again! And it will never cease. And suddenly the matter presented itself in a quite different aspect. Vermiform appendix. Kidney, he said to himself. It's not a question of appendix or kidney, but of life and death. Yes, life was there and now it is going and I cannot stop it. Yes. Why deceive myself? Isn't it obvious to everyone but me that I'm dying, and that it's only a question of weeks, days? It may happen this moment. There was light and now there is darkness. I was here and now I'm going there. Where? A chill came over him, his breathing ceased, and he felt only the throbbing of his heart. When I am not, what will there be? There will be nothing. Then where shall I be when I am no more? Can this be dying? No, I don't want to. He jumped up and tried to light the candle, felt for it with trembling hands, dropped candle and candlestick on the floor, and fell back on his pillow. What's the use? It makes no difference, he said to himself, staring with wide open eyes into the darkness. Death. Yes, death. And none of them knows or wishes to know it, and they have no pity for me. Now they are playing. He heard through the door the distant sound of a song and its accompaniment. It's all the same to them, but they will die too. Fools. I first, and they later, but it will be the same for them. And now they are merry. The beasts. Anger choked him and he was agonizingly, unbearably miserable. It is impossible that all men have been doomed to suffer this awful horror. He raised himself. Something must be wrong. I must calm myself, must think it all over from the beginning. And he again began thinking. Yes, the beginning of my illness. I knocked my side, but I was still quite well that day and the next. It hurt a little, then rather more. I saw the doctors, then followed despondency and anguish, more doctors, and I drew nearer to the abyss. My strength grew less and I kept coming nearer and nearer, and now I have wasted away and there is no light in my eyes. I think of the appendix, but this is death. I think of mending the appendix, and all the while here is death. Can it really be death? Again terror seized him and he gasped for breath. He leant down and began feeling for the matches, pressing with his elbow on the stand beside the bed. It was in his way and hurt him. He grew furious with it, pressed on it still harder, and upset it. Breathless and in despair he fell on his back, expecting death to come immediately. Meanwhile the visitors were leaving. Prasovya Fedorovna was seeing them off. She heard something fall and came in. What has happened? Nothing. I knocked it over accidentally. She went out and returned with a candle. He lay there panting heavily, like a man who has run 1,000 yards, and stared upwards at her with a fixed look. What is it, Jean? No, thing. I upset it. Why speak of it? She won't understand, he thought. And in truth she did not understand. She picked up the stand, lit his candle, and hurried away to see another visitor off. When she came back he still lay on his back, looking upwards. What is it? Do you feel worse? Yes. She shook her head and sat down. Do you know, Jean, I think we must ask Leshetitsky to come and see you here. This meant calling in the famous specialist, regardless of expense. He smiled malignantly and said, no. She remained a little longer and then went up to him and kissed his forehead. While she was kissing him he hated her from the bottom of his soul and with difficulty refrained from pushing her away. Good night. Please God you'll sleep. Yes.
KaraokeBooks.
Chapter 6. Ivan Ilyich saw that he was dying, and he was in continual despair. In the depth of his heart he knew he was dying, but not only was he not accustomed to the thought, he simply did not and could not grasp it. The syllogism he had learned from Kieswetter's logic. Kies is a man. Men are mortal. Therefore Kies is mortal, had always seemed to him correct as applied to Kies, but certainly not as applied to himself. That Kies, man in the abstract, was mortal, was perfectly correct, but he was not Kies, not an abstract man, but a creature quite separate from all others. He had been little Vanya, with a mama and a papa, with Mitya and Volodya, with the toys, a coachman and a nurse, afterwards with Katenka and all the joys, griefs, and delights of childhood, boyhood, and youth. What did Kies know of the smell of that striped leather ball Vanya had been so fond of? Had Kies kissed his mother's hand like that, and did the silk of her dress rustle so for Kies? Had he rioted like that at school when the pastry was bad? Had Kies been in love like that? Could Kies preside at a session as he did? Kies really was mortal, and it was right for him to die. But for me, little Vanya, Ivan Ilyich, with all my thoughts and emotions, it's altogether a different matter. It cannot be that I ought to die. That would be too terrible. Such was his feeling. If I had to die like Kies the first would have known it was so. An inner voice would have told me so. But there was nothing of the sort in me, and I and all my friends felt that our case was quite different from that of Keyes. And now here it is, he said to himself. It can't be. It's impossible. But here it is. How is this? How is one to understand it? He could not understand it, and tried to drive this false, incorrect, morbid thought away and to replace it by other proper and healthy thoughts. But that thought, and not the thought only but the reality itself, seemed to come and confront him. And to replace that thought he called up a succession of others, hoping to find in them some support. He tried to get back into the former current of thoughts that had once screened the thought of death from him. But strange to say, all that had formerly shut off, hidden, and destroyed his consciousness of death, no longer had that effect. Ivan Ilyich now spent most of his time in attempting to re-establish that old current. He would say to himself, "I will take up my duties again, after all I used to live by them." And banishing all doubts, he would go to the law courts, enter into conversation with his colleagues, and sit carelessly as was his wont, scanning the crowd with a thoughtful look and leaning both his emaciated arms on the arms of his oak chair. Bending over as usual to a colleague and drawing his papers nearer, he would interchange whispers with him, and then suddenly raising his eyes and sitting erect would pronounce certain words and open the proceedings. But suddenly in the midst of those proceedings the pain in his side, regardless of the stage the proceedings had reached, would begin its own gnawing work. Ivan Ilyich would turn his attention to it and try to drive the thought of it away, but without success. It would come and stand before him and look at him, and he would be petrified and the light would die out of his eyes, and he would again begin asking himself whether it alone was true. And his colleagues and subordinates would see with surprise and distress that he, the brilliant and subtle judge, was becoming confused and making mistakes. He would shake himself, try to pull himself together, manage somehow to bring the sitting to a close, and return home with the sorrowful consciousness that his judicial labors could not as formerly hide from him what he wanted them to hide, and could not deliver him from it. And what was worst of all was that it drew his attention to itself, not in order to make him take some action but only that he should look at it, look it straight in the face. Look at it and without doing anything, suffer inexpressibly. And to save himself from this condition Ivan Ilyich looked for consolations, new screens. And new screens were found and for a while seemed to save him. But then they immediately fell to pieces or rather became transparent, as if it penetrated them and nothing could veil it. In these latter days he would go into the drawing room he had arranged, that drawing room where he had fallen and for the sake of which, how bitterly ridiculous it seemed, he had sacrificed his life, for he knew that his illness originated with that knock. He would enter and see that something had scratched the polished table. He would look for the cause of this and find that it was the bronze ornamentation of an album that had got bent. He would take up the expensive album which he had lovingly arranged, and feel vexed with his daughter and her friends for their untidiness. For the album was torn here and there and some of the photographs turned upside down. He would put it carefully in order and bend the ornamentation back into position. Then it would occur to him to place all those things in another corner of the room, near the plants. He would call the footman, but his daughter or wife would come to help him. They would not agree, and his wife would contradict him, and he would dispute and grow angry. But that was all right, for then he did not think about it. It was invisible. But then, when he was moving something himself, his wife would say, "Let the servants do it. You will hurt yourself again." And suddenly it would flash through the screen and he would see it. It was just a flash, and he hoped it would disappear, but he would involuntarily pay attention to his side. It sits there as before, gnawing just the same. And he could no longer forget it, but could distinctly see it looking at him from behind the flowers. What is it all for? It really is so. I lost my life over that curtain as I might have done when storming a fort. Is that possible? How terrible and how stupid. It can't be true. It can't, but it is. He would go to his study, lie down, and again be alone with it. Face to face with it. And nothing could be done with it except to look at it and shudder.
KaraokeBooks.
Chapter 7. How it happened it is impossible to say because it came about step by step, unnoticed, but in the 3rd month of Ivan Ilyich's illness, his wife, his daughter, his son, his acquaintances, the doctors, the servants, and above all he himself, were aware that the whole interest he had for other people was whether he would soon vacate his place, and at last release the living from the discomfort caused by his presence and be himself released from his sufferings. He slept less and less. He was given opium and hypodermic injections of morphine, but this did not relieve him. The dull depression he experienced in a somnolent condition at first gave him a little relief, but only as something new. Afterwards it became as distressing as the pain itself or even more so. Special foods were prepared for him by the doctor's orders, but all those foods became increasingly distasteful and disgusting to him. For his excretions also special arrangements had to be made, and this was a torment to him every time, a torment from the uncleanliness, the unseemliness, and the smell, and from knowing that another person had to take part in it. But just through his most unpleasant matter, Ivan Ilyich obtained comfort. Gerasim, the butler's young assistant, always came in to carry the things out. Gerasim was a clean, fresh peasant lad, grown stout on town food and always cheerful and bright. At first the sight of him, in his clean Russian peasant costume, engaged on that disgusting task embarrassed Ivan Ilyich. Once when he got up from the commode too weak to draw up his trousers, he dropped into a soft armchair and looked with horror at his bare, enfeebled thighs with the muscles so sharply marked on them. Gerasim with a firm light tread, his heavy boots emitting a pleasant smell of tar and fresh winter air, came in wearing a clean Hessian apron, the sleeves of his print shirt tucked up over his strong bare young arms, and refraining from looking at his sick master out of consideration for his feelings, and restraining the joy of life that beamed from his face, he went up to the commode. "Gerasim," said Ivan Ilyich in a weak voice. Gerasim started, evidently afraid he might have committed some blunder, and with a rapid movement turned his fresh, kind, simple young face which just showed the first downy signs of a beard. "Yes, sir? That must be very unpleasant for you. You must forgive me. I am helpless." "Oh, why, sir?" and Gerasim's eyes beamed and he showed his glistening white teeth. "What's a little trouble? It's a case of illness with you, sir." And his deft strong hands did their accustomed task, and he went out of the room stepping lightly. 5 minutes later he as lightly returned. Ivan Ilyich was still sitting in the same position in the armchair. "Gerasim," he said when the latter had replaced the freshly washed utensil, "please come here and help me." Gerasim went up to him. "Lift me up. It is hard for me to get up, and I have sent Dmitri away." Gerasim went up to him, grasped his master with his strong arms deftly but gently, in the same way that he stepped, lifted him, supported him with one hand, and with the other drew up his trousers and would have set him down again, but Ivan Ilyich asked to be led to the sofa. Gerasim, without an effort and without apparent pressure, led him, almost lifting him, to the sofa and placed him on it. "Thank you. How easily and well you do it all." Gerasim smiled again and turned to leave the room. But Ivan Ilyich felt his presence such a comfort that he did not want to let him go. "One thing more, please move up that chair. No, the other one, under my feet. It is easier for me when my feet are raised." Gerasim brought the chair, set it down gently in place, and raised Ivan Ilyich's legs on it. It seemed to Ivan Ilyich that he felt better while Gerasim was holding up his legs. "It's better when my legs are higher," he said. "Place that cushion under them." Gerasim did so. He again lifted the legs and placed them, and again Ivan Ilyich felt better while Gerasim held his legs. When he set them down, Ivan Ilyich fancied he felt worse. "Gerasim," he said, "are you busy now?" "Not at all, sir," said Gerasim, who had learned from the townsfolk how to speak to gentlefolk. "What have you still to do?" "What have I to do? I've done everything except chopping the logs for tomorrow." "Then hold my legs up a bit higher, can you?" "Of course I can. Why not?" And Gerasim raised his master's legs higher, and Ivan Ilyich thought that in that position he did not feel any pain at all. "And how about the logs?" "Don't trouble about that, sir. There's plenty of time." Ivan Ilyich told Gerasim to sit down and hold his legs, and began to talk to him. And strange to say, it seemed to him that he felt better while Gerasim held his legs up. After that, Ivan Ilyich would sometimes call Gerasim and get him to hold his legs on his shoulders, and he liked talking to him. Gerasim did it all easily, willingly, simply, and with a good nature that touched Ivan Ilyich. Health, strength, and vitality in other people were offensive to him, but Gerasim's strength and vitality did not mortify but soothed him. What tormented Ivan Ilyich most was the deception, the lie, which for some reason they all accepted, that he was not dying but was simply ill, and that he only need keep quiet and undergo a treatment, and then something very good would result. He however knew that do what they would, nothing would come of it, only still more agonizing suffering and death. This deception tortured him, their not wishing to admit what they all knew and what he knew, but wanting to lie to him concerning his terrible condition, and wishing and forcing him to participate in that lie. Those lies enacted over him on the eve of his death and destined to degrade this awful, solemn act to the level of their visitings, their curtains, their sturgeon for dinner, were a terrible agony for Ivan Ilyich. And strangely enough, many times when they were going through their antics over him, he had been within a hairbreadth of calling out to them, "Stop lying. You know and I know that I am dying. Then at least stop lying about it." But he had never had the spirit to do it. The awful, terrible act of his dying was, he could see, reduced by those about him to the level of a casual, unpleasant, and almost indecorous incident, as if someone entered a drawing room diffusing an unpleasant odor. And this was done by that very decorum which he had served all his life long. He saw that no one felt for him, because no one even wished to grasp his position. Only Gerasim recognized it and pitied him. And so Ivan Ilyich felt at ease only with him. He felt comforted when Gerasim supported his legs, sometimes all night long, and refused to go to bed, saying, "Don't you worry, Ivan Ilyich. I'll get sleep enough later on," or when he suddenly became familiar and exclaimed, "If you weren't sick it would be another matter, but as it is, why should I grudge a little trouble?" Gerasim alone did not lie. Everything showed that he alone understood the facts of the case and did not consider it necessary to disguise them, but simply felt sorry for his emaciated and enfeebled master. Once when Ivan Ilyich was sending him away, he even said straight out, "We shall all of us die, so why should I grudge a little trouble?" Expressing the fact that he did not think his work burdensome, because he was doing it for a dying man and hoped someone would do the same for him when his time came. Apart from this lying, or because of it, what most tormented Ivan Ilyich was that no one pitied him as he wished to be pitied. At certain moments after prolonged suffering he wished most of all, though he would have been ashamed to confess it, for someone to pity him as a sick child is pitied. He longed to be petted and comforted. He knew he was an important functionary, that he had a beard turning grey, and that therefore what he longed for was impossible, but still he longed for it. And in Gerasim's attitude towards him there was something akin to what he wished for, and so that attitude comforted him. Ivan Ilyich wanted to weep, wanted to be petted and cried over, and then his colleague Shebek would come, and instead of weeping and being petted, Ivan Ilyich would assume a serious, severe, and profound air, and by force of habit would express his opinion on a decision of the Court of Cassation and would stubbornly insist on that view. This falsity around him and within him did more than anything else to poison his last days.
KaraokeBooks.
Chapter 8. It was morning. He knew it was morning because Gerasim had gone, and Peter the footman had come and put out the candles, drawn back one of the curtains, and begun quietly to tidy up. Whether it was morning or evening, Friday or Sunday, made no difference, it was all just the same. The gnawing, unmitigated, agonizing pain, never ceasing for an instant, the consciousness of life inexorably waning but not yet extinguished, the approach of that ever-dreaded and hateful death which was the only reality, and always the same falsity. What were days, weeks, hours, in such a case? "Will you have some tea, sir?" He wants things to be regular, and wishes the gentlefolk to drink tea in the morning, thought Ivan Ilyich, and only said, "No. Wouldn't you like to move onto the sofa, sir? He wants to tidy up the room, and I'm in the way. I am uncleanliness and disorder," he thought, and said only, "No, leave me alone." The man went on bustling about. Ivan Ilyich stretched out his hand. Peter came up, ready to help. "What is it, sir?" "My watch." Peter took the watch which was close at hand and gave it to his master. 8:30. "Are they up?" "No, sir, except Vladimir Ivanovich, who has gone to school. Prasovya Fedorovna ordered me to wake her if you asked for her. Shall I do so?" "No, there's no need to. Perhaps I'd better have some tea," he thought, and added aloud, "Yes, bring me some tea." Peter went to the door, but Ivan Ilyich dreaded being left alone. "How can I keep him here? Oh yes, my medicine. Peter, give me my medicine." "Why not? Perhaps it may still do some good." He took a spoonful and swallowed it. "No, it won't help. It's all tomfoolery, all deception," he decided as soon as he became aware of the familiar, sickly, hopeless taste. "No, I can't believe in it any longer. But the pain, why this pain? If it would only cease just for a moment." And he moaned. Peter turned towards him. "It's all right. Go and fetch me some tea." Peter went out. Left alone, Ivan Ilyich groaned not so much with pain, terrible though that was, as from mental anguish. Always and forever the same, always these endless days and nights. If only it would come quicker. If only what would come quicker? Death, darkness? No, no. Anything rather than death. When Peter returned with the tea on a tray, Ivan Ilyich stared at him for a time in perplexity, not realizing who and what he was. Peter was disconcerted by that look, and his embarrassment brought Ivan Ilyich to himself. "Oh, tea. All right, put it down. Only help me to wash and put on a clean shirt." And Ivan Ilyich began to wash. With pauses for rest, he washed his hands and then his face, cleaned his teeth, brushed his hair, looked in the glass. He was terrified by what he saw, especially by the limp way in which his hair clung to his pallid forehead. While his shirt was being changed, he knew that he would be still more frightened at the sight of his body, so he avoided looking at it. Finally he was ready. He drew on a dressing gown, wrapped himself in a plaid, and sat down in the armchair to take his tea. For a moment he felt refreshed, but as soon as he began to drink the tea he was again aware of the same taste, and the pain also returned. He finished it with an effort, and then lay down stretching out his legs, and dismissed Peter. Always the same. Now a spark of hope flashes up. Then a sea of despair rages, and always pain. Always pain, always despair, and always the same. When alone he had a dreadful and distressing desire to call someone, but he knew beforehand that with others present it would be still worse. Another dose of morphine, to lose consciousness. I will tell him, the doctor, that he must think of something else. It's impossible, impossible, to go on like this. An hour and another pass like that. But now there is a ring at the doorbell. Perhaps it's the doctor? It is. He comes in fresh, hearty, plump, and cheerful, with that look on his face that seems to say, "There now, you're in a panic about something, but we'll arrange it all for you directly." The doctor knows this expression is out of place here, but he has put it on once for all and can't take it off, like a man who has put on a frock coat in the morning to pay a round of calls. The doctor rubs his hands vigorously and reassuringly. Brr! How cold it is! There's such a sharp frost. Just let me warm myself, he says, as if it were only a matter of waiting till he was warm, and then he would put everything right. Well now, how are you? Ivan Ilyich feels that the doctor would like to say, well, how are our affairs? But that even he feels that this would not do, and says instead, what sort of a night have you had? Ivan Ilyich looks at him as much as to say, are you really never ashamed of lying? But the doctor does not wish to understand this question, and Ivan Ilyich says, just as terrible as ever. The pain never leaves me and never subsides. If only something. Yes, you sick people are always like that. There, now I think I am warm enough. Even Prasovya Fedorovna, who is so particular, could find no fault with my temperature. Well, now I can say good morning, and the doctor presses his patient's hand. Then dropping his former playfulness, he begins with a most serious face to examine the patient, feeling his pulse and taking his temperature, and then begins the sounding and auscultation. Ivan Ilyich knows quite well and definitely that all this is nonsense and pure deception, but when the doctor, getting down on his knee, leans over him, putting his ear first higher then lower, and performs various gymnastic movements over him with a significant expression on his face, Ivan Ilyich submits to it all as he used to submit to the speeches of the lawyers, though he knew very well that they were all lying and why they were lying. The doctor, kneeling on the sofa, is still sounding him when Prasovya Fedorovna's silk dress rustles at the door and she is heard scolding Peter for not having let her know of the doctor's arrival. She comes in, kisses her husband, and at once proceeds to prove that she has been up a long time already, and only owing to a misunderstanding failed to be there when the doctor arrived. Ivan Ilyich looks at her, scans her all over, sets against her the whiteness and plumpness and cleanness of her hands and neck, the gloss of her hair, and the sparkle of her vivacious eyes. He hates her with his whole soul, and the thrill of hatred he feels for her makes him suffer from her touch. Her attitude towards him and his diseases is still the same. Just as the doctor had adopted a certain relation to his patient which he could not abandon, so had she formed one towards him, that he was not doing something he ought to do and was himself to blame, and that she reproached him lovingly for this, and she could not now change that attitude. You see, he doesn't listen to me and doesn't take his medicine at the proper time. And above all, he lies in a position that is no doubt bad for him, with his legs up. She described how he made Gerasim hold his legs up. The doctor smiled with a contemptuous affability that said, "What's to be done? These sick people do have foolish fancies of that kind, but we must forgive them." When the examination was over, the doctor looked at his watch, and then Prasovya Fedorovna announced to Ivan Ilyich that it was of course as he pleased, but she had sent today for a celebrated specialist who would examine him and have a consultation with Michael Danilovich. "Please don't raise any objections. I am doing this for my own sake," she said ironically, letting it be felt that she was doing it all for his sake and only said this to leave him no right to refuse. He remained silent, knitting his brows. He felt that he was surrounded and involved in a mesh of falsity that it was hard to unravel anything. Everything she did for him was entirely for her own sake. and she told him she was doing for herself what she actually was doing for herself, as if that was so incredible that he must understand the opposite. At 11:30, the celebrated specialist arrived. Again the sounding began and the significant conversations in his presence and in another room, about the kidneys and the appendix, and the questions and answers, with such an air of importance that again, instead of the real question of life and death which now alone confronted him, the question arose of the kidney and appendix which were not behaving as they ought to and would now be attacked by Michael Danilovich and the specialist and forced to amend their ways. The celebrated specialist took leave of him with a serious though not hopeless look, and in reply to the timid question Ivan Ilyich, with eyes glistening with fear and hope, put to him as to whether there was a chance of recovery, said that he could not vouch for it but there was a possibility. The look of hope with which Ivan Ilyich watched the doctor out was so pathetic that Prasovya Fedorovna, seeing it, even wept as she left the room to hand the doctor his fee. The gleam of hope kindled by the doctor's encouragement did not last long. The same room, the same pictures, curtains, wallpaper, medicine bottles, were all there, and the same aching suffering body, and Ivan Ilyich began to moan. They gave him a subcutaneous injection and he sank into oblivion. It was twilight when he came to. They brought him his dinner and he swallowed some beef tea with difficulty, and then everything was the same again and night was coming on. After dinner, at 7 o'clock, Prasovya Fedorovna came into the room in evening dress, her full bosom pushed up by her corset, and with traces of powder on her face. She had reminded him in the morning that they were going to the theater. Sarah Bernhardt was visiting the town and they had a box, which he had insisted on their taking. Now he had forgotten about it and her toilet offended him, but he concealed his vexation when he remembered that he had himself insisted on their securing a box and going because it would be an instructive and aesthetic pleasure for the children. Prasovya Fedorovna came in, self-satisfied but yet with a rather guilty air. She sat down and asked how he was, but, as he saw, only for the sake of asking and not in order to learn about it, knowing that there was nothing to learn, and then went on to what she really wanted to say, that she would not on any account have gone but that the box had been taken and Helen and their daughter were going, as well as Petrushev, the examining magistrate, their daughter's fiancé, and that it was out of the question to let them go alone, but that she would have much preferred to sit with him for a while, and he must be sure to follow the doctor's orders while she was away. Oh, and Fedor Petrovitch, the fiancé, would like to come in. May he? And Lisa? All right. Their daughter came in full evening dress, her fresh young flesh exposed, making a show of that very flesh which in his own case caused so much suffering, strong, healthy, evidently in love, and impatient with illness, suffering, and death, because they interfered with her happiness. Fedor Petrovitch came in too, in evening dress, his hair curled à la Capoul, a tight stiff collar round his long sinewy neck, an enormous white shirt front and narrow black trousers tightly stretched over his strong thighs. He had one white glove tightly drawn on, and was holding his opera hat in his hand. Following him the schoolboy crept in unnoticed, in a new uniform, poor little fellow, and wearing gloves. Terribly dark shadows showed under his eyes, the meaning of which Ivan Ilyich knew well. His son had always seemed pathetic to him, and now it was dreadful to see the boy's frightened look of pity. It seemed to Ivan Ilyich that Vasya was the only one besides Gerasim who understood and pitied him. They all sat down and again asked how he was. A silence followed. Lisa asked her mother about the opera glasses, and there was an altercation between mother and daughter as to who had taken them and where they had been put. This occasioned some unpleasantness. Fedor Petrovitch inquired of Ivan Ilyich whether he had ever seen Sarah Bernhardt. Ivan Ilyich did not at first catch the question, but then replied, "No, have you seen her before?" "Yes, In Adrian Le Couvreur, Prasovya Fedorovna mentioned some roles in which Sarah Bernhardt was particularly good. Her daughter disagreed. Conversation sprang up as to the elegance and realism of her acting. The sort of conversation that is always repeated and is always the same. In the midst of the conversation Fedor Petrovitch glanced at Ivan Ilyich and became silent. The others also looked at him and grew silent. Ivan Ilyich was staring with glittering eyes straight before him, evidently indignant with them. This had to be rectified, but it was impossible to do so. The silence had to be broken, but for a time no one dared to break it, and they all became afraid that the conventional deception would suddenly become obvious and the truth become plain to all. Lisa was the first to pluck up courage and break that silence, but by trying to hide what everybody was feeling, she betrayed it. "Well, if we are going, it's time to start," she said, looking at her watch, a present from her father, and with a faint and significant smile at Fedor Petrovitch relating to something known only to them. She got up with a rustle of her dress. They all rose, said good night, and went away. When they had gone, it seemed to Ivan Ilyich that he felt better. The falsity had gone with them. But the pain remained. That same pain and that same fear that made everything monotonously alike. Nothing harder and nothing easier. Everything was worse. Again minute followed minute and hour followed hour. Everything remained the same and there was no cessation. And the inevitable end of it all became more and more terrible. "Yes, send Gerasim here," he replied to a question Peter asked.
KaraokeBooks.